Greetings viewers, Eric the Car Guy. Thank you very much for tuning in. We have another episode of Dad's Truck Build for you, or ETCG Dad's Truck, I believe I'm calling it. And in this episode we're going to be covering the upgrading of the rear differential. We're going to be installing a limited slip and 373 gears back here. Now this is a 10 bolt rear end, or also known as an 8.5 inch. That's because of the size of the ring gear. Some hate it, some love it. I'm going to run it because it's what I had in the truck and it was already here. Just wrapped up some work on the rear suspension, so these wheels aren't on here, but obviously you've got to take them off to do this work. Sorry.
What did I do?
We're just throwing lug nuts at the cameraman today. Oh crap, no wonder it wasn't stopping. I've removed all this stuff in a previous video. Yep, all that stuff's gone too. Thieves. Now I'm going to get to the center section. I'll remove this cover here. When you do this for the first time, I like to leave the top one in or somewhere around the top, and that way when the cover comes loose it doesn't come falling off on the floor or something, and that way it can drain into a suitable container. But these are all 1/2 inch. But once again, just knock that last one loose, and that way if there's any fluid, which there still is a little bit of fluid in there, it doesn't make a huge mess. It's going to take this the rest of the way off. And just going to let that drain. Looks really good. And somebody used a gasket. Oh, so awesome. I like gaskets better than a bunch of RTV. Okay, well I took the cover off and was like, whoa, hey, what's that? And what is that? Well, I'll tell you what that is. That is a locker. It's a GM locker. I believe it's called a Gov lock. It works like on a governor system. As these weights fly out, as one wheel loses traction, this will lock in the gears in the back. And then at other times it won't. So when I originally spun the wheels, like I spun one wheel one way and the other wheel went the other way, I assumed it was an open differential. Well, I assumed incorrectly. Instead, this is a locker type of differential, albeit a weak type of locker differential. So in other words, I've done some research, and running any kind of power through this, it can be kind of dicey. And considering I already have a limited slip to go in here, well, I think I'm going to stick with that. I mean, I thought for a second, I was like, hey, I got a locker. And then I looked this one up, and like I said, it doesn't hold up well under real power. Also, it doesn't work above 30 miles an hour. Job one is going to be to get the axles out, and in order to do that, I need to remove this pin. In order to remove this pin, you need to remove this bolt. It is 5/16. If you're lucky, a magnet works. I'm lucky. All right, now I need to rotate it around so I can get to the C-clips, which should be right in here. This is the tip of the axle right there. I'm gonna push it in, and you can see right there, that little clip. That's what we're after. Once again, we'll get our little magnet, borrow that clip. Oh, come on, you wanna come with me? Come on, you wanna be my friend? Yeah, there we go. That is called a C-clip. And once that's out, your axle can come out. And you just pull it forward, out like this. Now let's see if we got 28 splines or 30. I think it's 30. Yeah, it's 30. We can confirm this by checking our differential fitment. This is a new differential. If it goes into this, I know it's 30. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, so it's 30. We've actually got to push in on the axle a little bit in order to expose that C-clip. There we go. I wonder why they call it a C-clip.
Could be a U-clip.
Same deal on this side. Kind of neat with the axles removed. You can see all the way through. Hi, how are you? Before I drop the differential out, I want to knock the pinion nut loose. And one of the reasons I want to knock it loose now, because look, it's just going to spin and spin and spin and spin and spin. So how are we going to get it to stop spinning so that we can get this nut off, so we can get this yoke off, so we can get the pinion out? I'll show you. It's super simple. Take a shop rag, stuff it up in the top, make sure it engages the gears, and then turn the pinion in the direction you want it to come off. And guess what? I just locked that up. So what's going to win in a fight between this ring gear and that rag? My money's on the ring gear. You're not hurting anything, but it's amazing how this just locks this whole thing up and makes it so you can knock this pinion nut loose. Now, maybe you can get it with an impact, great, but if all you got is a breaker bar, this is your best friend. I'm gonna use an impact, but principle still works. 1.25 inches. You know why? Because I put it in backwards. Silly me. All right, now I'm gonna put it in the right way. Mr. Smarty Pants, yeah. See? Locks it up nice. Put it in the bottom, not the top. And all you gotta do is just take your rag back and wow. There you go. Now that we've done that, we can drop the carrier out, which is held in by these caps. Couple of things that are important here. First of all, keep the caps on the same side. Second of all, there will be shims on either side of this. Keep the shims on the same side that they come out of. And it looks like here the thin line is facing towards the differential on both of these. Kind of looks like this gasket's just gonna come off for me. So I'm gonna do just that. Oh, I love it. Love it. I'm gonna use a 16 millimeter to remove these. You can even mark these like left and right maybe before you ever take them out. Okay, like I said, there's a shim here and a shim here behind the carrier bearings. It's gonna fall out when I roll this out of here. Maybe, maybe not. Also the races might want to come with. Okay, there we are. There's really not much else we need here. In fact, we don't even need these races because these go with this differential. But what I did with these shims is I put them in the same orientation as they are in the truck. And I'm just gonna set this whole assembly aside. Because this will work just fine for like a regular passenger car. You know, if you're not putting massive power through it. I'm just concerned that the power that I'm putting through my truck might be too much. I already removed the pinion nut. I think there's a washer down there too. But I'm gonna try to get the yoke off. Pinion is now mine. Should be. There's some kind of Loctite type stuff on here. This should slide through, but I'm gonna get a bigger plastic hammer. Ooh. There's our pinion. I'm of the opinion. Hey Eric, what's the gear ratio? Great question, viewer. It might be embossed on the outside of that, or that number probably means something. But the tried and true way to just figure it out is count the teeth. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 6, 37, 38, 39, and 40. So now we take 40 divided by 13, and I believe that comes out to 3.07 something, blah, 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 blah. Basically, these are 308 gears. I'm gonna take this lady slipper and knock the front race and bearing out. There's a little lip down inside here that you can get purchase on the back side of the race. I'm gonna be changing both of these bearings, these pinion bearings, so I'm not too worried about using this. Do not damage the case, but just come on the back of the races. I'm gonna walk it back and forth, so I'm not gonna only hit it on one side. When it starts to move, I'm gonna jump over to the other side and do it. So I'm gonna try to walk it out. Ow. And now we'll give it a final hit so we can knock the seal out on the other side, because the seal is going to come with the bearing and everything. So now I've got to knock this race out from the other direction, here and here. I have, well, the cheap Harbor Freight slide hammer, and it's not ideal for this as far as this attachment goes, but there are attachments that work great for this. But I'm going to remove the axle bearings now, probably in pieces using this thing. Use a slide hammer and preferably the correct attachment. I did mention that was going to happen, didn't I? We still need to get the race out, which is that piece that's broken that you see before you. I did mention this was like the worst attachment. I've went through this before, and I said, next time I do a differential, I'll have the tool. Still don't have the tool. This tool is junk. I am sick of that piece of crap. And we're back. A visit to my local auto parts store, and I rented the tool. That was the only way I could get it in a timely fashion. I'll put a link in the description to a tool that this is specifically designed to pull axle bearings. All right, this is how this works. You turn it over on its side, and then when you put it in, you turn it back the other way so that it locks in. The right tool makes all the flipping difference. I'm doing a disc brake conversion. I don't need these backing plates. I'm going to take them off now. I'm going to cover that in detail in another video. Now that the differential is all stripped down, or should I say the axle housing, I'm going to go in with some brake clean and clean it out. As the gear spins, it actually brings the oil up into this passage and allows it to go up in here to lubricate the bearings. So it picks up the oil, lubricates it down in here, that's the return. Especially if you've had a differential failure, it's super important to do this, you know, get out any metal shavings or anything like that. And now that I've got most of it out and most of it clean, the next thing I'm going to do is go in with some compressed air and clean out these holes, so that when I torque everything down, it works. Now, something about the 10-bolt rear end that I've read somewhat common is that these plug welds can leak. So if you have leaks here, it's actually coming in the inside of from the axle tube, and that needs to be re-welded in order to fix that seal. Some people think it's a different seal. Also, when you put a lot of power through these rear ends, it's also recommended that you weld a bead around the outside of this. Now, there are two types of carrier housings. There's a steel housing and a cast iron housing. If it's a steel housing, and the way you tell the difference is you get a grinder and grind on the edge of this. If the sparks that come off it are orange, then it's steel. If the sparks that come off it are somewhat white, then it's cast iron. It feels a little softer than cast iron. If it's cast iron, you got to heat this up in order to do any welding, but if it's steel, you're okay. If you crank your welder up all the way, you could run a bead around the outside of this to help prevent that tube from breaking loose. I haven't done that. I'm going to be around the 400 horsepower mark, so I don't think that's too much. But anyway, it's just a suggestion if you're doing a rebuild on a 10-bolt rear end in a performance application. With the differential housing cleaned out, I'm going to install the races for the pinion shaft now, the front and rear. I've found both races here. They go with the bearings, so this is the lower one, so this would be this one. And then there's the upper one that goes in the opposite way, that goes in the outside. So this all came in my kit, which is right here, that I got from Summit Racing. I will say, however, that it did not come with axle seals. I think I mentioned that, but also the axle bearings in this kit are too small. If you're working on a truck like I am, you're going to need bigger axle bearings. So you need to order those as well. But it did come with shims for both underneath the pinion and for the sides of the differential. And the differential bearings appear to be correct. So we'll be pressing those on in a minute. But in order to install this, I have this seal driver slash race driver kit right here that I'll link in the description. Comes with a bunch of these. You find one that is the appropriate size, like this, and it will help you drive it down in there. You do not want to damage this surface at all. This is where the bearing lives. Bearings need nice, clean, machined surfaces to live long lives. Make sure everything's good. All right. And you'll know it's in by the sound. Hear how the sound changed? you're bottomed out. Whenever you install new bearings, install new races. So this driver fits in there pretty snug, but I'm gonna try to drive it in with this tapered side this way, and if I have to, I'll flip it around to finish it off. And yes, I'm a guy with a drawer full of hammers. It doesn't like the rubber hammer. Here's the differential I decided to go with. And you might be asking why I decided to go with a cone style differential. Honestly, it's what was available through Summit, which is where I got this. I will link it in the description so you can check it out for yourself. But with these cone style, you have to know that once they wear out, they're worn out and you have to replace the whole unit. It's not like you can go in and replace clutches or anything. This looks like it has a little cosmoline and some just general junk on it. So I'm just gonna rinse it with a little brake clean before I get started with it. Next step, I'm gonna install the carrier bearings on either side, and for that we need to go over the press. When I press this bearing on, I'm gonna press the carrier into the bearing, but I'm gonna put it in its race as I press. Don't keep going, just when it seats, it's ready. That's one bearing. Now when this comes down, it's not pushing on the bearing, it's pushing on the differential, on the center part. The bearing actually sits down in a little bit, so I'll be pushing on this really middle part. And you saw how easy that went together. As long as you don't like overdo it, you should be fine. I suppose you could also like put the bearings in an oven or something like that, heat them up, and then they may just drop on there. There's our second bearing. Next, I'm turning my attention to the pinion, and I want to get the pinion bearing off. And you might say to yourself, you got a new pinion, why would you even bother? There's shims underneath here that set pinion depth, and I'm hoping I get lucky by removing this bearing and harvesting these shims, and these shims will set the correct pinion depth. Also, if this bearing, and if, this is a huge if, this bearing is the same type of bearing as the bearing I'm installing, I can turn this into a setup bearing. So in other words, if my pinion depth is not correct, I can hollow out the inside of this so it slips onto the pinion really easily and comes off and is not a press fit, and allows me to test pinion depth. But there's an easier way to do that. If you have a pinion depth gauge, then you just set that thing up and find out your pinion depth, and that does make it easy. But for the rest of us, we need a trial and error setup, and hopefully we get lucky by using these shims. In order to get this bearing off of here with any hope of possibly saving it, I have this bearing separator set, which I'm going to use now. Kind of look like I might destroy my pinion in the process of this, or my pinion bearing, so I may have to rethink that part of it, or just hope that I get lucky. I'm going to try something different. I feel that that bearing separator is going to destroy this bearing. I didn't get a second bearing. I almost need to use this as a setup bearing, or at least a comparison. It looks pretty close to what I have now. A way to possibly get this off without using a bearing separator or without a press is with heat. If you heat the inner bearing race up enough, it could expand and it may fall right off the pinion shaft, which is what I'm hoping for. Probably the gear oil is going to catch on fire, and it's going to be a lot of smoke and a bunch of other stuff and bad smells that you won't be able to smell, but I'll smell. Either way, I'm going to give this a try. I've never tried this method before. I've used like half a tank of gas on this. I'm not seeing any movement. At this point, I've cooked the bearing so much, it's never coming back. We're still gonna take this off and probably destroy it in the process. I will likely take my new pinion bearing and turn that into a setup bearing. That way I can get everything set up and order another pinion bearing so that I can put it all back together when I get the new one. I'm gonna let that cool and come back. Now that we've got that out of the way, my gear set. They are a 373 gear ratio. These are Summit gears that I'm trying out. Obviously, I got them from Summit. Links in the description. This bag is not important. Don't eat it. Take a look at the difference between these two. Interesting, right? So taller gears have a larger pinion, and shorter gears have a smaller one. Looks like somebody already checked the gear tooth pattern. We're done. Let's go home. So the 10 bolt's a 10 bolt, but it's also known as the 8.5 inch ring gear. You can see that ring gear, 8.5 inches. I would like to mount the ring gear onto the differential carrier assembly. Before I do that, this surface has to be like pristine, like no burrs, no nothing. So a common practice before installation is to take a flat file and just go around the whole thing, making sure that there are no burrs or anything that's going to cause any issues when these two mate up. Doing what I can to keep this flat because you don't want to do this, which is what I was doing here. So I'm trying to keep it on the biggest flat that I can so that it remains flat. Now it's time to mount the ring gear onto the differential assembly. Ooh. So we've made sure that there are no burrs or anything on the ring gear, which is nice. That needs to be a nice, good mating surface. Same with the differential, where they come together. Now I'm going to put both of these together. I will be installing some Loctite on these bolts. Thread locker, if you will. I'm only going to start with a couple. These are left-handed thread. So in other words, you spin them just the opposite way you think you need to spin them in order to install them. Don't ask me how I know. So to tighten, it feels like you're going to be loosening. Once you get the first one started, the rest should go a little bit easier. Make sure you got good thread engagement, because this stuff hits the floor, it might shatter. You can draw this up onto here, or this is what I like to do. I like to install all the bolts and get those all started, and then I'll take it over to my vise and just push the ring gear up onto the differential, and then I'll tighten everything up, which is what I intend to do now. Cameraman Brian thinks I said vise in the last clip. I probably did. What I meant to say was press. Okay, so I put this in the press like this. I got 2x4s underneath the ends. It's already fallen together. There's no gap here, so I don't have to do anything. My method, I basically put the wood blocks on to protect the diff when I put it in here. I'm not too worried about the wood hurting the carrier at all. Just don't want it to move. I love how the vise is locked off now. Sweet! Having to bust out my other type of torque wrench because my beam torque wrench won't work here because it's left-handed thread, right? What do these get tightened to, Eric? What's the torque? Torque is 60 foot-pounds. Remember, you're loosening to tighten, or they're left-handed threads. 60 foot-pounds star pattern, so I'll keep bouncing back and forth all the way around to evenly draw it up. Starting with this guy. I'm just going to snug them all before I start torquing. All right, for real now. These were 19 millimeter. This guy seems safe here and is pretty much complete and ready for installation. I'm just going to leave it. Now we're going to start prepping out our pinion. I'm going to sacrifice this bearing. I've already taken its number. There's two manufacturers. There's Koyo and Timken that make bearings. And I found a difference between the two, and if you don't use the exact same type of bearing for your setup and your final, it'll never be right. So I've learned that the hard way, but this one, its number is right there. I believe that 802048-N is the one for this set. So to turn this into a setup bearing, there's a press fit between here and the pinion. I'm gonna just basically open up this whole area with a die grinder, and this will take a while. this is the shim we worked so hard for. I'm gonna put that on first, and then our setup bearing. Yep. Wish they all went on that easy, but it's an interference fit, or it has to be an interference fit. I just cleaned up my washer a bit. I have a new pinion nut that I'll use for the final installation, but for now, I'm gonna reuse the old one. We're gonna take this over and put it in the truck. And then this bearing goes in like this. Uh-oh. Well, you may have seen during the installation that this sort of went on and stopped. So I decided to check the old setup, and same thing. Then I checked the factory service manual, and it says you need to basically knock this onto this shaft once it's in there. Also, I forgot to install the crush sleeve, which I was going to use my old one for practice for this. Since I'm going to be getting another one of these bearings as a practice bearing, I'm going to do the same thing to this and hollow out the inside so this just falls on top of here. The concern is that if I have to take this in and out several times, that, well, first of all, I'll probably damage this bearing anyway. I probably won't damage the pinion, but the fact that I have to take it on and off several times means that I run the risk of damaging this, which I do not want to do. Therefore, I'm going to turn this into another quote-unquote setup bearing like this that just slides on, just so that I can check my pinion depth and make sure everything is how it should be. Remember all that difficulty I had getting this off of there? Well, I'm going to see if I can clean these splines up a bit. I'm not putting a pinion seal in here or anything just yet. We're just checking the setup. Proper preload is 20 to 25 inch-pounds during rotation. Yeah, I'm not there yet. I'm like maybe 5. That looks about right. Yeah, it's a little on the light side. It's about 24. So 20 to 25, that's that. Sorry viewers, I'm going to call that the end of part 1 of the ETCG Dad's Truck rear differential rebuild. It's been a lot of fun up to this point. Now part 2 will be posted in a week, or if you're watching this after that video is posted, I'll post a link to part 2 down in the description right towards the top so you can go there and watch it right now. Or if you're a premium member of EricTheCarGuy.com, you get a chance to watch this video in its entirety along with a few additional scenes. In the description will be linked parts, information, stuff that I used here, just additional stuff. So please check the description for additional information, or if you wondered about what tool I was using, that would be down in the description. If you have automotive questions not covered in this video, I ask that you head to EricTheCarGuy.com. Also linked in the description. Yes, there's a theme here. I want to thank you so much for watching. Be safe, have fun, stay dirty, and I will see you next time.